We can't ever get rid of shame, that warm wash that makes you feel small and not enough. Now when it washes over me, I'm like, okay, I'm in shame. Then reach out and talk to someone about what you're feeling. Shame cannot survive being spoken. Shame can't hold on because shame can't survive empathy. The greatest shame trigger is do not be perceived as weak. So you don't have to skip too many steps before you go, hey, it's shaming to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's about the willingness to show up and be seen when you can't control the outcome. And it is actually our greatest measure of courage. So show up in an authentic way and let us see your hearts. I can't imagine a way through what needs to happen over the next decade that does not involve understanding pain. There's this incredible James Baldwin quote that says, "Now I understand why people hold on to their hate so stubbornly, because once they let it go, there's nothing but pain." I think we dismiss and don't care about that pain at our own peril, because pain will make itself known. It will not be dismissed. It's not an affect or an emotion that dissipates when it's ignored. And if you look at leadership, whether you're in an organization leading a country, leading a family, as a parent, one of the cheapest, easiest ways to lead is to give people someone to hate and blame for your misery. And so we have to really watch that in our country right now. All you have to do when people are in uncertainty and fear is give them someone to blame and give them a reason to blame them, and then step back and watch everything just fall apart. And so I think that's happening right now in our country. And so, we have to own our pain. And let me tell you, every crisis we're up against right now, almost without exception, is about our inability, our unwillingness to deal with pain. If you look at the opioid addiction right now across, somewhere, beginning with physicians, sent the message, there's no reason for you to hurt at all. Here's a pain reliever. Things are not going well in your life. Well, here's a way to discharge hate and pain that'll make you feel better. Like medicated, addicted, in debt, and obese Americans in history. Our tolerance for discomfort is zero. Our inability to be vulnerable, that makes us weak. And it's not modeled because I think parents fear kind of soft boys turning into soft men who, I remember interviewing this guy who was in his 70s, and I said, "What is shame to you?" And he's like, "Shame is being the kid you can shove up against the lockers." But really, we've got to shift it, and we've got to shift it. I think it starts parenting, school, athletics is huge. So why do we think, as men, to pretend like you're not vulnerable makes you the most vulnerable, makes you the most susceptible? I mean, we just have data. I mean, just like I could fill this whole room with data about you don't get to opt out. Let me ask you this. Do you know a guy in the world who can say, I've existed at this point in my life without being uncertain, at risk, or emotionally exposed? You can't not do vulnerability, but you can pretend like you don't. Then you're not making choices over the behaviors you engage in when you're vulnerable. Then you don't know when you're vulnerable, and then you're acting nutty. Vulnerability is defined as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Can you name one act of courage that you've ever been involved in or that you've ever even witnessed that did not involve uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? And it's a loaded question because I know the answer is no, because I've asked it thousands and thousands. I've stood in front of Navy SEALs and Special Forces military personnel and said, give me an example. I want you to try hard to give me an example of courage that didn't require vulnerability. And in 10 years, I've never had a single person be able to come up. I've even had two guys come up to me who were in the military that said, we're going to think about it and get with you. Give me an example of courage, even on the field, that doesn't involve vulnerability. If you think you're being brave and it doesn't involve risk or uncertainty, you're not being that brave. And so in that moment, people go, shit, but I want to be brave and I don't want to be vulnerable. And I'm like, therein lies the great dilemma of our time.
Right.
No one wants to be uncomfortable. No one wants to be vulnerable and everyone wants to be brave. And it just doesn't work like that.
And anytime we try something new, we've got to be uncomfortable.
It's vulnerable.
Yeah, it's vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, when I ask people what is vulnerability, people would say, sending my child out the door who thinks he's going to make the first chair in orchestra and knowing he's probably not going to make the orchestra at all. Getting fired, starting my own business, saying I love you first in a relationship, trying to get pregnant after my first miscarriage. I mean, like, vulnerability is, it's uncertainty. It's not knowing, but doing it anyway, because it's the brave thing to do. And so the problem is, I think, that the greatest shame trigger for men is do not be perceived as weak. And in our culture, we believe that vulnerability is weakness. So you don't have to skip too many steps before you go, hey, it's shaming to be vulnerable. And so men do two things in the face of shame: pissed off or shut down. And so what we're learning and what people are starting to see very quickly is you cannot be a courageous leader if you're not vulnerable, if you're not willing to have hard, uncomfortable conversations, give hard feedback, receive hard feedback, excavate issues that no one wants to talk about. Discomfort is the great enemy of courage. Like, my motto is, we say it here all the time, choose courage over comfort, because you can't have both. And if you think you're being brave and you're super comfortable, you're not being that brave.
What would you say to all the men of the world in general?
I think I would say that vulnerability is not weakness. It's about the willingness to show up and be seen when you can't control the outcome. And it is actually our greatest measure of courage. So show up in an authentic way and let us see your hearts, because we know how lonely you actually are. I mean, it's really, men are lonely. It's really hard. But I don't think I would say anything differently to women as either. Because, for women, the greatest shame trigger is do it all, do it perfectly, and never let them see you sweat, look perfect, work perfect, but don't ever look like you're putting any effort toward it. We can't ever get rid of shame. What we can do is develop resilience to shame. So when it happens and it washes over, that warm wash that makes you feel small and not enough, when that washes over me, rather than yelling at my kids or just decimating myself with hateful language, and like, you're stupid or you're not, Now when it washes over me, I'm like, okay, I'm in shame. Don't talk, text, or type. What happened? I still have triggers around it. I still think it's probably the same. Motherhood, trying to, do everything and balance everything and be where I'm supposed to be. And that's still hard sometimes.
Yeah. What's the process that someone should take on when they feel shame, anger, rage? Well,
shame I can really help you with is, first and foremost, talk to yourself like you talk to someone you love. So if something happens and you're overwhelmed with shame, the first thing you need to do is get back on your emotional feet. Don't talk, text, or type to anyone, because one of the things we want to do is push that shit out on other people. Get into a dark, quiet place and then talk to yourself like you talk to someone you love. Just be like, dude, it's okay. Like, you screwed this up. What you said was super hurtful. You're gonna have to circle back and clean that stuff up. But give yourself a break here. Then reach out and talk to someone about what you're feeling. Shame cannot survive being spoken. So if I call you and I'm like, oh my God, Lewis, I'm in a shame shitstorm, you're not gonna believe what happened, and you listen to me and you respond empathetically, oh my God, I've been there, or oh God, I get it, I'm sorry, that sucks. Shame can't hold on, because shame can't survive empathy. So two choices. You own your story, you get to write the ending. You don't own the story owns you. So then you talk about it now. So shame can't hold on. But then people see and hear you talking about it, and it gives them permission to talk about it. That's why shame cannot hold on to being spoken. So your courage to talk about that deflates shame. It takes it out of the air. It's like filtering poison out of water, because you've got the courage to speak up. I mean, and that's how it works. And that's how all of this works, is that we own our story, or it owns us.